Simon O'Hara from Road Freight, New South Wales. While Mr O'Hara is making his way up, Jerry, if I can just have a bit of self-indulgence, I was hoping to have a witness, Sally Tipping from Tipping's Transport. She was very keen to come along, and unfortunately, due to personal issues within her life, I just want to wish Sally and her family all the very best and hope 2021 is a better year than 2020. Now, for the Hansard record, if you could please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today, Mr O'Hara.
Thank you, Senator Searle. Simon O'Hara, CEO, Road Freight, New South Wales.
And for those out there, Simon and I know each other very well, and it's a pleasure working alongside you. So would you like to make a opening statement before we might squeeze a couple of questions in? But I would urge, please get everything on the record that you want to. Just take the time to get that out.
No, thank you, Senator Searle, and it's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to be here today. And I'd just like to note, in 2019, you came along to our conference out in Western Sydney, and that was received very, very well. I just want to put that on the record that our members, our operators, really appreciated your appearance, and in terms of our survey, you got a really big tick in terms of your appearance.
Thank you. I must say too, Simon, I think someone tried to offer me an Aldi bag at the time, but I didn't realise it had a thank you letter in it or something.
That's right. That was part of the gist of the conference, so I appreciate your humour on that front. Look, Road Freight New South Wales began in 1893. We've been around for a while. We've had a few ups and downs. We're a peak body representing freight operators within New South Wales. We represent container operators, oversized overmass operators, line haul, and of course dangerous goods. We're primarily situated in Sydney and the Sydney Basin, but we do cover areas outside that, and we have members that range from the big to the small to the medium, and we've got a long line and a long heritage of being what you'd describe as a decent employer representative within New South Wales. If I might just make a couple of points, we've been careful, particularly during my tenure in the role, to align ourselves with partners that are responsible and who do deliver things like safety for operators and also truckies. So we're aligned with Daimler and Teletrack Navman, and they offer systems that go to some of the very points that you, or indeed this committee, have raised within the terms of reference. And if I might again beg the indulgence of the committee, I'd just like to make a couple of points, given the last 12 months has been primarily focused on COVID. We've had a lot to do in terms of advocacy on that front, and we've seen a lot of different and strange things occurring during that period. But the main thing has been that freight has stood up and carried the load. And I'd just like to make the point that, that freight trucking operators have put their shoulder to their wheel in a big way, and in my opinion, are essential workers at the same level as healthcare workers, those guys and girls that man the supermarkets, doctors and nurses. And what I would say is that during this period we've seen the importance of various industries, and freight and truckies has been one of those essential industries. And while we ask whether we need a lawyer or a financial planner or a hedge fund manager, during this period it's very clear that those professions are optional, and the garbos, the teachers, the nurses, the doctors, the truckies have been essential during this period to keep Australia operating, and they've done it under very difficult circumstances. They've crossed borders, they've had to comply with a range of rules and regulations, and what they have done is that they've kept us supplied. And during this period we've seen the absolute importance of the trucking industry and what it means. And I think before then what we've seen has been effectively a bit like milk on the shelves. It just arrived, it's there magically.
Toilet paper.
Indeed.
That's right.
So I'd just like to make that point, and it's a point that I've been making for a little bit of time. And what it has really revealed has been some of the deficiencies within the system. And when you've got to argue for truck stops to open, for food to be available, for toilets to be open for truckies who are keeping regional towns and rural towns and cities supplied with basic necessities, there are some fundamentals here that I think need to be addressed in terms of the way in which we treat truckies on the road and also the way in which we deal with trucking operators. When, we've got to argue about keeping a toilet opened in Dubbo, for instance, and allowing conditions to, be in place for truckies that we just wouldn't allow for white-collar workers. There'd be a revolution if white-collar workers had to fight to use a toilet at work. Yep. So from that perspective, I think there are some fundamental questions here. In terms of skill shortage, which is part of the ambit of this committee, and it's a real pleasure again to be here. I can remember years ago being before this committee and Senator Heffernan telling me that he would put me in a headlock. So it's a few years since then, and it's a few years since I welcomed that offer from Senator Heffernan.
He still threatens me with that. So
does he?
Even though he left 2 years ago.
Well, that was certainly a good offer, which I accepted at the time, Senator Stirl. Look, we've engaged with government and also TAFE to discuss how we would encourage schools and TAFE to deliver better and skilled workers to the transport industry and freight. We've had long discussions. It's problematic, and we've met with the Minister, at least in New South Wales, on this issue. It's problematic. There's a lot of lack of directional focus sometimes, if I can be blunt.
Can I ask questions as we go, Simon, because I'm very keen? Sorry.
No.
I know the passion of industry to want to train and want to attract. And the trouble is, we have these inquiries, and then we sit back and we throw out all the challenges on the table. Yes. And I remember saying at the Transport Industry Standards Forum in Canberra, after about 6 hours, saying, well, no wonder we can't get young people into our industry. But that's tongue-in-cheek, but unfortunately. I want to know how you went with that, because the West Australian government, and good on them, and I've had my fair share of differences of opinion with them, have now announced a $14 million spend on training where they've worked with Cam Dumsey in the Western Roads Federation, Tim Dawson from the TWU, and with David Fife from the Livestockies.
Yes.
And God help us, all the voices of industry came together for a common cause, and we've had success, or they've had success. So let's share the frustration here.
Sure. So look, Cam's a great advocate in Western Australia, and we're mates, if I can put it in those terms. He's done some great work in WA. I'm not so sure that I agree with the idea of seceding from the Commonwealth, but that's really a matter for you guys. But in terms of the skills shortage, what I would say is that there are fundamental issues with the way in which we seek to train people, and when I get calls from members or operators in Tamworth asking where they can send their young people to get a particular component of training, and that component of training may not be within a reasonable geographic distance, that becomes quite difficult for them to actually use the services of TAFE, for instance. And I don't want to have a go at TAFE, because that's not my intention. We have engaged well with TAFE in the past. We have looked at bringing through young school leavers through a system within our collaboration with TAFE, and we've held events where, for instance, I've gone and spoken to school leavers or young people 16 and above.
So sorry, Sean, you've been invited into the school to do that while they're at school?
So during COVID, we did something along those lines where and together with my board, we sat down and we had a discussion with school leavers about the industry, from 16 and above, I should say, and we had a opportunity to talk to them about the industry and then give them a virtual tour of one of our members or indeed operators' trucking operations.
How did that go down?
Yeah, look, that went pretty well. In fact, we got a number of students who put in applications to come and work immediately, which was really worthwhile. It's about how you translate that into real action, both with the employer, but also with ensuring that skills are taught during that process. And I think there needs to be a refocus on the issue of skills, because if we don't, we're going to continue to see this hodgepodge affair.
So, Simon, I tried that at one of the schools I was a patron of, and the problem it was lower entry into the removal industry.
Yeah.
Because there are children around Australia, and I was one of those who didn't leave school, we escaped. And there are kids who really want to get out there and work with their hands. So the problem we had is a lot of the parents said, "Oh, we don't want my little darling having to be a furniture removalist or probably a truck driver." So would you agree from Road Freight New South Wales, unless you have the education department on side, we're never going to get anywhere. So what I want to, while you're on the skills, so what has Road Freight New South Wales done to progress those conversations with the relevant minister?
Yes.
Have you had any opportunity to do that? And if so, could you share your successes or your frustrations?
Sure. So from the perspective of successes, look, that's the first time that those sorts of meetings or discussions have taken place that I'm aware of in the last 5 years in terms of that engagement with students. So we saw that as a big positive, and the Department of Education came to us with that proposal, which was worthwhile. In terms of meetings with the Minister on this front, we haven't met with the Minister Lee, for about 2.5 years. What we did do was meet with the Minister to talk to him about creating traineeships and the like, and getting something moving in New South Wales that would allow young people to move into the industry. And from our perspective, there's a skills shortage, but there's also a driver shortage.
What, sorry, driver?
A driver shortage.
Yeah.
So what we'd like to do is see that addressed in a substantive way, because each year what we see is the mean age of the average truck driver is actually increasing. So a couple of years ago it was 54, now it's 56. It keeps increasing and increasing, and what we see is needing to happen is you need to skill young people up and create an attractive industry for them to actually want to go into. And so when I spoke to this school group, I was able to talk to them in a very sort of matter-of-fact way about the type of industry that it is. And as a result of that, we got a number of applications that arose from that day. The next day, they sent through expressions of interest in terms of actually moving out of school into the industry and how we would do that. From our perspective, it's about how you manage that and how you do that, and I think there needs to be clear pathways about how you do that. But if I could also beg the indulgence of the committee in terms of some of the other issues we raise that fall within the ambit of your committee's terms of reference, and I might just hand up, if I can again beg your indulgence, two documents. One's called Empty Yard Fees, and the other one's called Port Infrastructure Access Fees and BBS fee increases, and these are two documents that we tabled.
You want to table that? Yep.
Yes, please. They're about 18 months old or 14 months old, so the data's a little bit older than we would like, but they give a good illustration of the types of increases that have gone on in the port, indeed Port Botany in Sydney.
I'm aware. Let's have a real good go at this, because I have had quite a bit of correspondence on this.
Okay.
And the tolls.
Yes, indeed. So from our perspective, and I saw that there was an increase on Friday from Hutchison at Port Botany from about $85, $88 up to about $135 for an infrastructure charge per container.
My goodness me.
Which is 56%, and that's just one. So from the perspective of 2021, I've seen 3 increases already, 2 from Patrick's, and that one on Friday from Hutchison.
Wow, just to lift the box on?
Just to lift the box off. And Hutchison have also, sorry, not Hutchison, Patrick's have just brought in a new fee. It's about $45, $50 it's a cost if you have to reverse an A-double into the facility to pick up boxes. So
Hang on, my head's spinning now.
so that's a reversing fee.
You mean actually physically reverse an A double? You're not allowed to reverse.
Well, you can reverse, but it's going to be a fee if you've got an A double.
What that? I'm having a nightmare here. Hang on. You've just taken. Not many people do this, but I'm actually lost for words. So if you physically put the the gearbox into reverse and back up an A double, you're going to get hit with a $50-odd
Per truck.
What is a reverse free zone? What did they base that on?
Look, Senator, I would suggest that these fees at our port are out of control. And I've said that for some time, and I've been an advocate on this issue for a number of years now. And the problem that we see is that there's a lack of will from both government and the bureaucracy to deal with burgeoning increases, which I can only describe as gouges at the port, which flow into the supply chain, which increase everything that we use.
But Simon, are they? Oh my jeez, it is where I can go to bite my tongue. But it's just pretty simple because Road Freight New South Wales members just go back out and get it off the client.
That's right. So there is a
piece of cake, isn't it?
Look, that's right, and there are additional charges that go into that because what we're seeing is effectively the larger players at the port offloading some of their work together with the fees to our operators. So there's an admin fee that gets added to this because they've got to administer it. We've got issues around empty containers that continue at the Port of Botany, while indeed the rest of the world is crying out for empty containers.
Yes.
We're swimming in them. So what we're seeing is, productivity outcomes being affected by not just these increases. And I ask the question, and it's not a rhetorical question. The question is, what do you get for paying these fees? And the answer to which I'm still at a loss to know what you get as an operator for paying these fees. But also, importantly, the amount of empty containers at the port remain an issue for us. And we do have an empty container working group that's sort of working its way through in a fashion on these issues. But my question really is, if we're going to have these sorts of problems at the port which are foreseeable, I mean, there's a test here, are they foreseeable? And they are. Then how are we going to deal with them? And this might be more of a New South Wales specific question. It might be a federal question as well. I note that some of these things have now been referred on to the NTC for further examination. I have requested further details on this, but seem to come up blank.
Sorry, Simon. I mean, your members would be absolutely ropeable.
They are.
But is there no way? Is there no way, or is there a working group that can present to the government, and regardless of what colour the government is, I'd be saying the same if it was my crew, to say, hang on, whoa, there is a duopoly down on the port, a job, or is there three of them?
Well, there's three of them, but there's really only two of them.
Let's cut to the chase, it's like the cement companies, all right?
Indeed.
And the fuel companies, they're all the same. So is there not someone in government that could say, well, hang on, this is a national sovereignty crisis? Because in this nation, when we talk transport, we should be talking about all four modes of transport, and they all integrate.
Indeed.
Is there not someone that says, stop, hang on, come in and see me, tell me your story, because we just can't have those who are running the ports just going, we're going to give a 56% increase on our cost for no valid reason, because we can, and give the middle finger to the consumers, well, not the consumers, because you can't pass it on. You try and pass it on. I'd tell you what, I reckon I'd lay a $2 scratchy that most of your operators won't get that $56 back.
Well, there's a number that
members.
Well, I mean, there's a number that are afraid to raise these questions, and I mean, it also turns on how often you put those increases to your clients. So that's an issue as well. I mean, we're currently what, sort of early Feb, and there's been 3 increases already at the port. I mean, something's obviously not working here, and we've had a bit to say about this. And to sort of Hugh's point earlier as well, and I concur with his point that there's an element of price taking here by our industry. But I think what's needed is greater engagement between decision makers and greater discussion amongst the supply chain that's substantive rather than ticking of boxes, which I'm afraid a lot of it, has been to date, which is unfortunate. Because if you don't address these issues, it's just going to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah.
And what you're going to see is small business owners leaving the industry because it's just too difficult for them. You've got a lot of middlemen sort of taking their cut who don't transport anything, who aren't doing the hard yards, and I think that's an issue, particularly when we say that Australia's made up of small business. I think that's going to be a real issue.
So what's Road Freight New South Wales' solution to this then?
Look, our view has been, and I think we've been pretty clear on this, and that is that if the system's not working, then you need to regulate for productivity. That if things aren't working, if there's complaints about things, then as much as possible you look at regulation. And I mean, from the perspective of Port Botany, we've got PIBLIS and we've got other types of regulation. But if the system's not working and you're looking at productivity decreases, then you've got to look at regulating it. And what we are seeing is that despite these increases in costs, slots per hour haven't gone up. So, I mean, in terms of how many boxes are available per hour to pick up in about 7 years, which is a real issue. So, from our perspective, our operators are concerned, and we've made, entreaties to both the state and the federal governments on this. We see it as a productivity issue, and I would suggest that government needs to act, and the bureaucrats need to look at this quite closely, because if you don't, you're going to end up with an industry that collects money on the basis of not actually providing any service, and I think that's a problem. If I could just go to the gig economy briefly.
Please keep going.
I saw about 2 years ago, I think it is now, I saw Senator Sheldon's presentation on this issue at Parliament House.
Yeah.
And he spoke very well, and it was something that I was quite startled by in terms of the amount of money that these large companies are prepared to put into the economy to sort of set themselves up. From our perspective and from our operators' perspective, we don't want to race to the bottom.
No.
We don't want to see large companies coming in here undercutting our local Australian businesses. And from the point of view of gigification, there are fundamental questions here that run contrary to, I think, the Australian way of life. And I think some of that's epitomised within the Harvester judgment, particularly.
Yeah.
And I don't think Australia wants to see the type of disbenefits that come from the gigification of freight. You might get cheaper deliveries, but there's a whole lot of problems that run off that. And from our perspective, we want to make sure that Australian businesses continue to make money, that it's sustainable, notwithstanding that it's a 2 to 3% profit margin. But we don't want to see that eroded. I mean, if you start cutting that out, then you start seeing Australian businesses affected, and the only winners are multinationals.
And this is where, Simon, that I've really welcomed the stance now taken by the state associations. And I've not been silent or whispering on this. I think the state associations are leading the charge. Because, quite frankly, we've had a situation here in Australia where we've been, and you don't need to comment, but we run protection rackets for those that aren't doing the right thing. We have done that over the years as an industry. Whereas now the ones, and I've always very clear on this, there are many thousands of decent, hard-working men and women in Australia in the transport industry, road transport, who pay their way. And they just want a better deal for their kids. They want to pay off their home. They want to go out there and do the job they love and get home safely, be rewarded financially, properly, and be respected as they're going about it.
Yes.
So it comes back to this. I really need the associations, I'm welcoming the louder voice to say to politicians, this is not just the unions having a whinge about rates. The damage that these platforms and the protection rackets for those doing the wrong thing does to the decent men and women, the decent companies. And you've touched on that, and I know you've been good on this, as has most of your, all your state colleagues. So how do we get that? How do we get that message across to those in federal parliament and those in state parliaments, that, just because your meat turns up at the shopping centre and, Woolies or Coles and your milk's there and everything else, there is a cost to do business. Yes. And how do we finally say, for crying out loud, legislators, yes, when we talk regulation, there's so much regulation in the industry, we want to get rid of a lot of it because a lot of it's crap regulation. But we need other regulation that says we still want to be there tomorrow, the day after, the trucks have got to be paid off and kids have got to go to school. So Simon, keep going down this path. I'm really, really keen to hear industry leaders talk about this. So
from the perspective of engagement, I think there might be some utility, insofar as a summit on this issue, perhaps when we can all come together again, when we're physically able to come together, that maybe there's a good opportunity here for us to have that sort of discussion, where there's a summit where you get a range of people involved, a range of peak bodies involved, that you're not all too precious to talk about this issue. Because one thing I have found is that regardless of the colour and creed of various freight companies or peak bodies, each one of them has their own view about a range of things, which falls directly into the purview of this committee's terms of reference. And I note that you've got waved to a truckie there from Sally Tipping.
You're going to get one too on the way out.
No, thank you. She's a great supporter, and she does a lot of good work in terms of, the view of the industry and how it's portrayed. And I think that the more we can emphasise that, the better, because what we do have here is Australian companies hiring young Australian people to be able to work within the Australian economy, who pay taxes.
Spot on. Yep.
Who put back, who move the food and, during COVID, the PPE, all of those sorts of things. It's a safe industry. It's a good industry. You've got people in it that, frankly, are the most decent people I've ever met.
Yep, I agree.
And the problem that we don't want to have is whereby you have a large company that comes in and says, well, we're prepared to have losses for 10 years.
Which they did say. They did.
While we map the industry so that we get enough intel on the industry to make informed decisions. From the perspective of Road Freight New South Wales, we don't support rogue operators. We don't support those operators that sit outside of the established norm of what's acceptable. Our operators pay a lot of money and spend a lot of time making sure that their operations are safe. You'll normally find that those that are part of associations such as ours are the ones that do want to do the right thing.
Absolutely, yes.
And I commend them for that. We've come out before, particularly with those companies. A couple of years ago, I came out about a company that crossed the Harbour Bridge in a truck and dog, unlicensed. He had an accident on the Carl Expressway, turned over.
Oh, okay.
There's really no room within the industry for those sorts of rogue operators, and it's not just for that particular area either. It's in terms of the way in which they operate themselves, and so from our perspective, we take a strong line on that.
Yes, and I hope I wasn't. I didn't come across as saying that you weren't.
No.
I said I'm very grateful of the state organisations stepping up to the plate. I really am, and NatRoads are very good on this stuff too. Very good on this stuff. So Simon, getting back to your list of things, and I have this tendency to jump in and interrupt all the time, but please keep going, because I don't want you to leave this room saying, oops-a-daisy, I didn't get the opportunity to throw my other point out.
So look, just in relation to establishing a more formal consultative relationship, I think there would be a good opportunity, particularly I think from the point of view of paying back the industry for all the good work it's done during COVID. The industry has stood up, been counted, done a great job. I think there's an opportunity here for us to go, well, there's an opportunity here for us to have a summit to improve the industry, and I've read a number of the submissions that have been made to this inquiry from a range of stakeholders. There's clearly more that needs to be done within the industry, but maybe we've got a bit of currency at the moment to be able to push some things through that would benefit everybody. So from my perspective and from the peak body's perspective, maybe a summit would be worthwhile where we get stakeholders together and the government in the room to be able to have those sorts of conversations.
And you're right, Simon, this time I full-heartedly agree, and I've had conversations around the nation where there are many people now starting to say, use the word reform, and that doesn't scare me. It doesn't scare me, but what better time now, that the Australia has realised everything in this nation starts off or ends up on the back of a truck. Everything we eat, we wear, we drink, we consume, we build, probably been on the back of a truck 6 or 7 times. So now is the time where it would be great if we had the leadership within our elected representatives to actually say, you know what, they may only be 7.8% of GDP. Not damn well, not bad, is it?
Not bad at all.
Yeah, not bad at all. And we may only employ, how many hundreds of thousands do we employ?
Indeed.
How many service industries hang off the transport industry? And my part that irks me, Simon, is that elected representatives fall over themselves when miners are in the room. Can't wait to get to the miners. And okay, good, they got a role to play. But you know what? It all starts on the back of a truck.
Doesn't it just? Doesn't it just? It's a funny set of situations, isn't it? I mean, from the perspective of our industry, at least in New South Wales, there's a big focus on the passenger side of transport. What we'd like to see is a greater focus on the freight side of transport and greater consultation and collaboration and engagement with us about what we see to be issues. I mean, we're not jumping up and down about port fees because we've got nothing better to do. We're jumping up and down because I get calls from operators sometimes 3 or 4 times a day.
I bet you do. Yeah.
About what these charges mean to them. And we've got to look for solutions rather than a tick a box approach. And so from the perspective of Road Freight New South Wales, what we've done as well is we've gone to government. We've gone, well, you've got these rat runs occurring in relation to WestConnex because some of the truckies... And
just for those listening, sorry Simon, I know what a rat run is, but just explain.
Look, rat runs are the back roads to be able to get from A to B. So they're the suburban streets that allow truckies to get from A to B rather than using, say, for instance, a toll road. So from the perspective of our association or our peak body, what we'd say is maybe it's time for the New South Wales government to look at incentivising truckies onto WestConnex, for instance. And maybe it's time that we look at, instead of community complaint at Bexley and elsewhere about trucks using suburban roads, then maybe we need to incentivise truckies onto the toll roads.
So how do we incentivise them? I think I know the answer, but how do we incentivise them?
So there's a range of ways. The first would be, for instance, that you give them reduced tolls, that you look at a tolling system that rewards off-peak travel, for instance, or that you deliver it through registration costs, or that there's a range of ways that you can incentivise trucking operators onto toll roads to be able to get them to use these newly built, great-looking toll roads and get them, moving freight on those roads. Because from our perspective, there's a safety component here as well. I mean, it's not just about saving money, but if you get truckies onto toll roads and you incentivise them onto doing that, then what you're looking at is safer outcomes. And if you incentivise truckies onto roads after hours as well, because Sydney operates most of the time, 18 hours, 20 hours a day.
Yeah.
And if you can incentivise them onto roads at off-peak periods when you've got less light vehicles, then you're going to see safer outcomes. So from the perspective of Road Freight New South Wales, we've put this to government. We've said to government, look, why don't we're all talking the talk about safety. We're all, we hold these weeks where it's safety week or safety day. Why don't we look at a tangible outcome where we can incentivise heavy vehicles onto toll roads, one, and two, maybe we look at different times of the day at which truck drivers can use the road. There's less light vehicles, they're able to get in, get out. These are two aspects of what we've put to government, and we've put it out there in terms of the public forum as well, that there's an opportunity to stop the back road use of suburban roads by trucks.
Getting any traction?
Not really. Not really. Not really. The COVID, in fairness to government, they get a lot of asks, but they also got a lot of asks from the grey nomads around tolling as well. And what I'd suggest is that if it's good enough for the grey nomads in terms of consistency and incentivisation, then it's good enough for the trucking industry, which delivers huge GDP outcomes to both New South Wales and also the national economy. Then the problem can be sometimes that COVID has constrained a lot of different budgets, but what we really need to do is raise the profile of what the trucking industry does, so that it's more of a state and national force as well.
Definitely. Simon, I'll chuck a curveball to you, and trust me, as you know, and I know, and transport operators know, safety is foremost in our minds, and we all now have politicians talking about safety and councillors talking about safety. But I'm of the opinion, I'd be interested to hear what Road Freight New South Wales thinks. We can all have all these safety conversations, and so we should. But we now need to break the shackles and say that safety goes hand in hand with viability, sustainability and profitability. And those other three just as important words are missing in Australia's narrative around safety of road transport. What's New South Wales Road Freight's thoughts around that?
Look, we agree with that. I mean, viability, and we've had this conversation before, that it can't just be a one-way street in terms of the viability of Australian businesses, particularly in freight. They've actually got to be viable to be able to make money, to make a profit, and it's not a dirty word. No, I mean, they've got to be able to make a profit to be able to not only pay their workers, but also to install the safe systems, but to also be able to pay tolls. I mean, the point of these new roads is that you have trucks using them, carrying their cargo. That cuts down time, maintenance costs, and delivers safer outcomes. And if that's not happening, then we've got to examine why rat runs are being used, and that perhaps we need to tweak it a little bit. But viability and sustainability of the trucking industry, to your point, is absolutely essential for freight in New South Wales, and I'd suggest across the country, because freight operators have to make a profit. It's got to be a sustainable industry. It can't become the purview of only those large companies that have economies of scale that can survive. Because if it does, then what you're going to see is you're going to see widespread increases across the board. And some of those large companies don't do so great anyway. I mean,
That's right.
Part of it is that we have small business continuing to grow, and small business is the backbone of the Australian freight industry. And we do have large players, but when you look at the stats in terms of how large they are, they're only a fraction of the total amount of the trucking industry. From my perspective, we have to stop the anti-competitiveness that's gone on in terms of the way in which some of those larger companies conduct themselves, but we also need to make sure there's viability there for small businesses into the future, because these small businesses pay tax.
Yes, they do.
They employ young people. They employ people. These are essential. These are essential. So from our perspective, we agree.
And I think on that too, Simon, this is what the part that hurts me. I was with a multinational company, and I was a rank and file, and then I was a company driver, and then I bought my own. And you look at that and you think, and you get these big companies, and these big companies who you quite rightly say, they are minute in the freight movements, but by crikey, they've got some big contracts. And when I talk to a number of big operators, when some might say to me, I won't name the company because I won't name the client because it won't take long to work out, but a massive let's just say food client that this company carts thousands and thousands of tonnes a week all around Australia, now gone out to 150 days. Now, how the hell, and it doesn't take much to work out, there's not many companies that could do that, but that's only one. The 60s, the 90s, Simon, you know about. Small companies can't do that. In fact, I'm from the old school, Simon. I believe you should be paid COD. And we know that's not going to happen. And everyone's getting themselves in a knot. They've got all their jocks in a knot because of how great they are. The government's going to put through 30-day payments, only if you're only if you're working in defence. And only if you earn over $100 million, what a load of rubbish that is. How many small operators can do this? So then it's the knock-on effect once again. But these big companies are getting it, and most of the freight's getting moved by small family businesses, subcontracting.
That's right. That's right. Yes, look, from our perspective, we've got a range of members who range from the small to the medium to the large. And I wouldn't want to give the impression that we don't, see various issues with each portion of those categories of member. But by and large, payment terms are an issue. Payment terms are an issue, and it flows on through the industry. And the question is, do we want a viable, sustainable industry in terms of allowing? I mean, if you do the job, you should get paid, and it shouldn't be 130 days down the path where you're calling, and I know companies that call every day after 30 days. Every day they call. And 130 days, I mean, if you're a small company and that's a reasonable sized contract, I mean, how many other jobs have you done for that company for there to be another 130 days on top of that? So that's a real concern.
Well, I'll throw one last one out here as a comment, Simon. I really appreciate the time that you put in. Thank you so much. And for the last 15 and a half years I've been on this committee, and predominantly most of the work is around agriculture because that's what's in its name. And our farmers, like our truckies, do a magnificent job. But I just couldn't imagine that if our farming sector had to put up with the some of the bad practices that the road transport industry has to put up with. I think there'd be a lot of politicians in Canberra who would be big noting themselves on the front page of the Australian, doing everything they can, quite rightfully, to protect the agriculture industry. Why are we any different? I know. Sorry to do that to you, Simon, but we're part of that industry too.
So it's about constituency, isn't it? And where does trucking fall within the natural constituency? Does it have enough political power? I think they're pretty fundamental questions.
Sorry to do that to you.
No, that's okay. No, it's a good question. It's a good question because what you do have is you've got a constituency that's broken up to a certain extent, and I think even opening up the description from trucking into a broader way of supply and logistics, or supply chain and logistics, might be something that kind of broadens it out a bit more. I think that would assist if you included perhaps more than less, rather than just narrowing it to trucking. I think that might be something that's worth considering. But in terms of the political constituency, I think it's probably time that the trucking industry, in all shapes and forms, sent its representatives forward, like others have in the past. And that constituency, whether it be red, blue or green or whatever colour, works together for the common good. And I know that there's a lot of debate amongst people about what do politicians do and all the rest of it. My experience is that, by and large, politicians actually work constructively together most of the time. It's just what you see on the TV. Sometimes puts a different slant on things. But I think fundamentally what you'd need is perhaps greater unity on this point. And I don't have a magic answer to this one. It's a tough one. That maybe on this there needs to be greater unity amongst states and the national bodies and government federally. That there needs to be an approach that works together rather than against. I don't want to sort of lapse into motherhood statements on this.
That's fine.
But I mean, maybe it's time for this constituency to stand up and send its representatives to Canberra, to Macquarie Street, elsewhere. And I note that there are certain constituencies that do have individuals in both of those forums, but maybe it's time to work together a bit more so that we're heard more. And look, I really appreciate the opportunity of appearing today before you. Your last question, I don't have a magic answer to, unfortunately, but maybe it is time we started looking at working together constructively a bit more.
Right. On that note then, Andrew, they say the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Well, we've got more wheels than anyone, but we haven't been squeaky enough down in Canberra and Macquarie Street and Spring Street and everywhere else. So on that,
thank you.
That's no disrespect to my friends down in Victoria, who've done a pretty good job. But anyway, Simon, thank you very much. And Road Freight New South Wales, we will be in touch.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming in today and sharing your thoughts, your members' thoughts. So now we're going to take a break to 11:15. Say 11:15. Okay. Thank you. All right. Short suspension. Thank you very much.